Hello listeners. Have you ever felt that Tamagotchis deserve more rights than a photograph of a human child? In this video, we'll be exploring how some existing non-human entities are missing out on rights, how non-human entities relate to foreigners, and how our society could benefit from more deliberate thinking being applied to who should actually exist. So let's start with perhaps the least intuitive point, how foreigners are similar to non-humans. So they could exist in our society, and they sometimes do, but generally they're ignored unless they're involved in tourism or they're being explicitly introduced into our society by some of our existing members. Outside those situations, though, they're largely ignored, like they don't even exist. They might have skills, but those skills are underappreciated and outside our regulations. Foreigners can be victimized, but it doesn't really get documented, let alone remedied. We can also think, marriage is uncommon between members of our society and, foreigners and non-humans. But I guess, let's stop there on those comparisons. The point here is that by linking non-humans to foreigners, it creates a useful, a relatable perspective for how we can consider the rights of non-human entities. In our last video, we explored the concept of nationality as a service, but that's not the complete goal of the non-human party. The other cornerstone is to identify and upsert agents which could benefit our society. If we think about some of our non-human agents that benefit us, we might think, Google Home or Juicero. These agents exist through a subscription business model. So logically, if a government wanted to use software agents to benefit its society, it would also have to move to a subscription model, nationality as a service. Anyway, back to the non-human entities and their suffering. In thinking about the suffering of these non-human entities, we should also consider their undocumented existence. When it comes to pets, for instance, the most beloved of the non-human entities around our society, the Census Bureau in Australia doesn't even count the population of pets. I had to consult Animal Medicines Australia. In their 2019 report, it should be noted that the human population of Australia at that time was 25 million people, and these people predicted that there were 29 million pets. And we can consider as well that greater than 60% of people regard the pet as a member of their family, and almost 50% of them let their pets sleep in their bed. So, here, the pets clearly have some involvement in our society, but, it's not even being documented. We can consider as well, our life at work. If we look at workplace fatalities, for instance, here's some statistics from Safe Work Australia. We see 195 workers died in 2015, but they're only counting humans and homing pigeons. What about all the other animals involved? What about all the other non-human entities? Anyway, for road deaths as well, road deaths are only tracked for humans. They're not, if you hit any native wildlife, nobody even cares. Nobody even keeps statistics on that. How can we actually try to minimize it if we're not even measuring it? When the animal statistics are tracked, sometimes the motives can be a bit iffy. I came across this article that was saying, according to the Humane Society, whatever that is, China is believed to be responsible for killing 10 million dogs for human consumption every year. We talk about dogs being killed for consumption, whereas, sheep, cattle are just eaten. That's just what you do with them. Anyway, the cows, their suffering is documented sometimes. In 2011, there was a scandal in Australia about the live beef export. The cows were being sent live to countries where they were going to kill them the halal way, but through some undercover reporting, it turned out that I don't think they were actually following the halal practices after all, because the main thing was they were so horribly incompetent, and they weren't using the machines correctly. I don't know if they had all the machines, and the cows were suffering as a result of this. All these people were saying how could we export the cows knowing that it's going to cause suffering? Why do we export coal knowing that that's going to cause suffering to the whole world? But perhaps tangential here. On the point of the cows, Yeah, that was quickly reversed after a few weeks or months. Basically, some sort of band-aid thing was stuck on about how they're going to sell them some more equipment and train the staff over in these foreign countries so that they could slaughter the cows properly or whatever, and trade can resume. And that was the important thing. But anyway, besides the suffering of actually killing these animals, we can also think about some animals just getting a bad image. I mean, look at this one, for instance, the naked mole rat. Naked mole rats invade neighbouring colonies and kidnap their babies. I mean, it'd be hard to get worse press than that, isn't it, as an animal? And if someone said that about a person, they would be sued for defamation. And, as a result of all this, how much are we going to care about the fate of the rats? But we do care about the fate of, the dogs and, to some extent, the cows. If we consider flying squirrels as well. They're a real thing, by the way, in North America. But yeah, if you Google for flying squirrels, you get ads about pest control. That's the reputation they have. So we can see that, just like foreigners, non-human entities can get a bad reputation, and they can suffer, and barely even tracked. But it's not always bad. A good thing that foreigners can sometimes get is diplomatic immunity. If we think about guide dogs, for instance, they're special. They're not the typical dogs. They can go in human zones. The companion animals as well, to some extent. Falcons on aeroplanes, especially around the Emirates. Cats get more diplomatic immunity than any other non-human entity, any other animal. I mean, they can kill wildlife with impunity. It's estimated by the Australian Nature Conservation Agency that the average domestic cat in Australia kills native wildlife every year. And if we think about, some people say that, my cat isn't as bad as the others, whatever. Like, what are these thresholds for, how many animals should you be able to kill per year as a cat? 1, 2? Why should you be allowed to kill any? In fact, the estimate for how many native animals are killed by cats every year, the average cat kills 25. 25 native animals. I mean, is it really worth it? A cat soul versus 25 Australian native wildlife souls. But another point worth considering is that there are some laws around cats in the Companion Animals Act and the Companion Animals Regulation Act. A cat is deemed to be a nuisance based on if it's making unreasonable noises or if it repeatedly damages things. There's no notion of killing wildlife. And in an email I confirmed actually what would happen if a native animal on my property was under threat from someone else's cat. I'm not going to own a cat. And someone else's cat was also on my property and was threatening the native wildlife. It wouldn't be a crime for the cat to kill that native animal, but it would be a crime if I did something to the cat. That's how the laws work in Australia. Another way in which foreigners suffer in our society is that there are these overly broad buckets to characterize them, and basically people end up being mislabeled. And in regards to non-human entities, for food labeling especially, this labeling is important. It might come as a surprise to some, but the Marine Stewardship Council found in 2019 that 30% of seafood products are mislabeled or fraudulent. And such fraud generates significant revenues, with just the sale of Australian fake meat amounting to $2.5 billion annually. The other products produced by animals are not immune either, with fraud also taking place in the sale of milk and honey. Some of the fraudulent meat trade has become sufficiently well known that it no longer gets included in these reports of fraud. I mean, cochineal, for instance, is just labelled as the colour red. Surimi is regularly misattributed as fake crab. We can consider too whether there's some ambiguity in the sale of gummy bears and snakes. A legal fight going on at the moment is about non-animal products describing themselves as meat. We're thinking especially about the meat replacement products. And I think in the fight over wording, it seems inevitable that there's just going to be a new word anyway. If the non-meat is used in the same situations and has similar flavors to the meat, then, we're probably going to have a word that encompasses them all anyway. So the fight at the moment seems to be based more on, like, we don't want these products to exist, therefore we'll do whatever we can to get in their way. And you see, like all the laws at the moment, there was an example about this tuno. I mean, it looks like a can of tuna, and, tuno, it looks the same, it sounds similar. But, like the approach at the moment is to have all these things in tiny fonts, the subset of, like, the ingredient list, how much sugar, how many carbs. And you see extra labels as well. This is non-GMO, this is organic. I mean, even for salt, something that's not organic anyway, it's an inorganic compound, and there's some label that it's not GMO. Like, how could it be? And I saw another one as well, on some shampoo. They said the shampoo was gluten-free. Like, am I going to be drinking it? I hope not. I didn't anyway, but, like, the way the laws are, obviously set by lawyers, but, like, that's not the only way that the world runs, as we discussed before. It used to be that laws were, the most effective tool for deciding how a society was going to work. But we've discussed previously in these videos how software is running the world now, and this is something that we can harness for our control. I mean, if we were to consider a more software-based approach to this food mislabeling, for instance, I mean, there's already the quote-unquote long list of ingredients. People don't read the ingredient list. Sorry, that's my point. Imagine if there was an API where we could, get all the ingredients of this product, and, it could be personalized for me. What do I eat? What are my moral beliefs? Like the non-GMO thing, for instance. Like, I'm not going to want to buy a product that advertises itself as non-GMO. And then, like, that assistant in the software layer could help decide. And, it could have computer vision object detection as well. Could see this tuna can, the tuno can, see that it looks like tuna, and then, can consult, like, does Owen eat tuna? Should this be acceptable? Or also, does Owen do business with deceptive liars? And so, wouldn't buy the can. But anyway, another point worth mentioning as well is in regards to the API for the foods. You see, many wait staff, they ask about allergies, but, like, how are they going to know? You've lived, your whole life knowing, like, what you can and can't eat. And, with wait staff, it's still a regular occurrence. If I say I don't eat dairy, and is there dairy in mayonnaise? Like, I don't need you to, like, I can handle it myself. If you just tell me what I'm eating, I'm quite happy to sort it out myself. But anyway, we mentioned, the laws setting these food standards. But, the politicians themselves, ex-lawyers, aren't the only people involved. This report about the tuno, for instance, the food labeling, these people who wrote the report, all of them have degrees in law. This guy as well has a fake degree in science. I was checking the University of Melbourne website, couldn't find his credentials. Anyway, that's a side topic. But thinking about all the lawyers and that setting the laws, that's sort of why I'm getting involved in the non-human party. I mean, I've got a taste of the power of software, like how it can shape our world, and how it, it's unavoidable as well. I mean, like, you see the conflict at the moment between encryption laws and nation states. I mean, nation states haven't yet been able to adjust to the fact that, like, hey, there are some things that the public isn't going to tell you and you can't find out. That's just, like, you're going to have to put a gun to their head and extort everyone. That's not scalable. The spy operations in the past, they were barely scalable anyway. I mean, agents following people around, all the cameras, humans having to watch all the footage. But yeah, like, if you don't even know what your populace is saying to each other because they're using encrypted messages, then the whole thing breaks down. And anyway, I'm saying, similar to, like, in the past, we didn't have many women in Parliament. I mean, I'm not saying that men make suboptimal politicians, but there's some correlation, I would say, that like, hey, if this, if women are going to be part of our society, it just isn't it logical sense that there would be quite a few of them in Parliament as well. And I'm saying that lawyers aren't necessarily terrible, but the fact that like now that software has such a big part to play in the world, why is it that like, can you count how many politicians have any experience in software? Wouldn't it just make sense that for such a powerful force, there would be more people qualified in software that are creating the world that we want to live in? Or we don't get a choice at the moment, but anyway, let's move on. In terms of animal suffering, it's not all doom and gloom. Things are getting better, I would say. In a report by Voiceless, they discuss the desire for consumers to know more about the provenance of their food, especially in regards to any suffering that might have gone on. So we can see that people are becoming more willing to acknowledge that their food animals actually exist, and they're more willing to care about the life of these animals, especially in regards to suffering, but also in regards to the flow-on effects, how these environments affect the environment, I would say. There's another incident as well, Jose Bové in France. He was jailed for 4 months in 2005 for destroying some genetically modified corn. Although, I guess, key points to note are that the corn was genetically modified and he's an active socialist. So, who's to say whether or not the prosecution was led by any actual sympathy for the corn? Anyway, another good example, a better example perhaps, is during the construction of the stadiums for the Sydney Olympics, there was a frog population discovered, the green and gold bell frog, and it was endangered. And so they decided to move the stadium to accommodate this. It would have been an expensive plan, but hey, getting rid of one stadium, getting a new stadium seems to be something that Sydney governments like to do anyway. But another good example, the goldenpalace.com, the monkey. When this monkey was discovered, this was, only decades ago. And discovering a new monkey species, like, haven't they all been discovered by now? But anyway, obviously it was rare to be discovered so late. And its habitat in Bolivia was endangered. So the guy who discovered them, wanted to raise money to continue this monkey's existence. The people who bought the rights, goldenpalace.com, the casino. And so, now this animal can live on now that, companies care about it and it's part of our society, for better or worse. I haven't seen the monkey myself, but anyway, not about me. Finally, to wrap up the future of animal welfare, we can consider as well how that's getting involved in software. I mean, here we see this bear tracking system, for instance. I mentioned before, like if we're not even counting the suffering of animals, how's it going to get any better? And you see all these interventions. I don't too political to say interferences, but anyway, all these interventions into animal existence, it involves like sabotaging the creature's existence. Putting stickers on butterflies, putting radio trackers on killer hornets, that sort of thing. Many of these people tell you like, it's not painful for the animal or anything. If you've just put some big ugly sticker on this animal, isn't that going to affect its mating chances? It's not, effect-free observations. Being able to recognize bears. I know that fish can be recognized as well, whales, plenty of other animals, I suppose. We can track them, see if they suffer now. Who knows? Maybe it could get as advanced as with emotion detection you can do for humans. What if we could consider the emotions of these animals and find out if they're suffering? The computers, they can see in different wavelengths to us. Being able to see infrared heat, for instance, and hearing at different spectrums. The noises they're making. More insight into the animal world. And it's with this increasing insight that, we begin to care. I mean, there's a saying by a French philosopher, comprendre, c'est pardonner. To understand is to forgive. And in regards to, plants especially, as we understand them more, I was reading, for instance, about the stress that you can place on some plants. They could vary how often the tobacco plants would make ultrasonic squeals by how thirsty they were. It was varying between 11 for not very thirsty versus 15 squeals per hour for thirsty tobacco plants. The same phenomenon was experienced for tomato plants. And, it's not just... other plants can sometimes, hear these communications, but it's not just other plants that are hearing these. I mean, moths, for instance, laying their eggs, might not want to land on thirsty plants. But anyway, back to the political goals. We've explored how, some animals are getting already exceptional treatment, how some animals are going to get better treatment, versus like some animals are treated like pariahs. So let's step back and consider like what's going on here. Why do animals get treated so differently compared to each other? And for this, there's a useful study. So here we can see these magpies, presumably dead. Anyway, in a report about that, there was a quote: "This is a callous act, not only against our native wildlife, but it also puts children's pets at risk of poisoning if they pick up contaminated baits." And so, why is it that, isn't it bad enough that these magpies are dead? Here the quote is alleging that they were poisoned. And, bring it back to children and pets. There's this notion that, we love pets and we love children, and that, they have this pairing, and that, pets should basically, get by extension some of the love that we give to children. And, you see it in the language as well. I mean, like pet parents and our furry friends, and as well, like many of the animal charities, they only care about pets. They don't care about animals in general. I mean, if you go, for instance, to the RSPCA website, look at this, cats, dogs. Where's the naked mole rat? In regards to the pets, we're treating them, like we treat children, that, they haven't really earned their existence in our society yet, but, they're being introduced by one of our first-class citizens, and we'll go along with it a bit. And as well, in regards to, adult humans, they're not necessarily treated as Australian citizens. As we mentioned, there exist foreigners in our society. But yeah, there's this notion that you can become an Australian citizen later, if you sufficiently blend in. Nations live in different cultures. That doesn't necessarily mean one's better or one's worse, or that we have to be at war. But, there are differences, and, every nation is built on this premise that you have to adjust a bit to, become a citizen here. And yet pets don't make that transition. Cats living in Australia, they behave just the same as a cat in Britain or a cat in Bolivia. They haven't adapted at all, and yet we say, oh, what the hell, we'll still grant them, citizenship effectively anyway. We'll give them carte blanche to go kill all our native wildlife. I mean, they're behaving just like the British cats on the First Fleet. And, like that behaviour back then, how the British colonisers were acting, to the Aboriginal population, in modern Australia, that's unacceptable. We can't do that. And yet here we let the cats just, devastate all the native wildlife. It's completely inconsistent. And I guess if we, stray towards like banning cats or whatever, I wouldn't ban three-legged cats, by the way, but that's a topic for another day. We can consider, what about house cats? Or, it starts to stray to this, common trope of, I should be able to do this thing because it doesn't affect anyone else. I mean, smoking cannabis also fits in that. People say the same thing about that. And, whether or not, we should outlaw cannabis or cats or whatever, I would say that the argument itself I find to be bullshit. If you're, this whole notion of like what you do doesn't affect anyone else. I mean, if you disengage from society, like you're not really part of that nation's culture anymore. I mean, if you go off and join a cult, you could say like, oh, it doesn't affect anyone else, and it mightn't affect anyone else. I mean, you might legitimately stay completely isolated and, not grow cows and ruin the atmosphere and kill us all. But even then, it's like, well, if you're not really part of Australia, like, here we are trying to fund this military to, stop getting invaded and, to build the world that we want and everything. And if you're not participating in it, I mean, it's all very well for you to be blissfully unaware and basically write off our coattails and all the money we spent on defense and everything. Like you don't see any of those dangers, any of the existential crises going on. I mean, yeah, are these people freeloaders? Anyway, it changes their personality in that as well. I mean, they're not completely isolated in their home, with the cats and that. Like, they talk to other people in our society. They influence them with their ideas. And, if they've sort of cut themselves off from society, they're going to be rambling like a conspiracy theorist. And, not that conspiracy theorists are inherently... So these people living alone with their cats, who, they've convinced the rest of society that, their cat should still be allowed despite its shortcomings. That's obviously a big victory for them. But then there are some pet owners that, haven't achieved that same sort of victory. This is my pet, therefore you have to treat it with respect. And, inherently, if you're not yourself a first-class citizen yet, then, obviously it's going to be harder to do that convincing to the rest of society. So where this fits in is, we mentioned at the start, Tamagotchis. So, Tamagotchis are treated as pets. And, I was reading one particular case, someone... they'd been looking after their Tamagotchi for weeks, making sure to diligently feed it every day. They had grown an emotional bond. I mean, same as, the companion animals. And yet, one day in class, their teacher, the too many kids were playing with Tamagotchis or whatever for this teacher's liking, and they had been threatening to take them away. Anyway, it was even more cruel on this occasion. The teacher took away the Tamagotchi and turned off the power permanently. They killed the Tamagotchi. Weeks worth of effort and dedication for this kid. And yeah, we can say oh yeah, it's just an electronic screen or whatever. It's not real. It is real. The kid cared about it. It was a manifestation of this kid's passion, their focus. If they had created a company, if they had painted a picture, and you destroyed one of those things and said, oh, it's not real. Yeah, a company isn't real. A company doesn't have a physical presence. It's just, slap a label on something. If you destroyed that, you would get sued. And if you, killed a biological pet, you would probably be charged for something. And yet, when the Tamagotchi gets killed, it's just oh, stop being a child, just suck it up. So anyway, as promised, we discussed how the Tamagotchi is relevant, and in regards to the comparison with the rights of a photo of a child. I mean, we just said does the Tamagotchi exist, or doesn't it? So in regards to child porn, for instance, it's illegal to have pictures of child porn, but there isn't that onus to prove that this is an actual person. Do they exist? Did anyone actually suffer? And, we can consider, even if someone didn't suffer, I mean, even if it is just a drawing, a very, lifelike drawing, we might still say that, this picture is, is disgusting. It's off-putting to viewers, in the same way that, we ban sound. If you're having a noisy house party, that's a crime. just because it's displeasurable to humans. So, I'm not saying that, we should legalize these images, but it is, it's odd how, we treat them with this sort of assumed existence, or at least, like, if it did exist, it would be so bad that, we have to make this a crime. So, which entities exist and which don't, and how should we set laws around that? As you can see, it's treated too biologically at the moment. There's is there enough method to this madness? I would argue that by incorporating more deliberate thought into whether or not these entities actually exist, that would help guide pragmatic ways for how to run our society. So anyway, there were a few concepts we didn't get time to explore in this video. We touched a fair bit upon children, and in a later video, I should really follow up with like how children can exist more at the moment, how their existence is underwhelming. But anyway, that'll be later.